When I moved into my son David's house, I thought it was the beginning of a fresh chapter, a chance to be surrounded by family after the loss of my own home. Losing my late husband years ago had been hard enough, but the financial strains that followed were even harder. David insisted I stay with him, Anna, and the kids. "You shouldn't have to worry about anything, Mom," he'd said with that warm, reassuring smile I had always trusted. Little did I know how short lived that comfort would be. The first few weeks weren't easy, but I tried to adjust. I didn't want to impose, so I kept myself busy with whatever I could do, helping with the laundry, tidying up the house, cooking meals. I adored my grandchildren, who brought a spark of joy to every mundane task. But Anna was different. From the moment I arrived, I could sense the tension. Her smiles were thin, her words polite but cold. It was clear she hadn't wanted me there, and I wondered if David had forced the idea on her. One evening, as I was folding laundry in the living room, I overheard Anna talking to David in the kitchen. Their voices were hushed, but the words carried clearly into the silent house. "She's been here for weeks, David," Anna hissed. "We don't have the space for this. She's disrupting everything." "She's my mother," David replied, his voice strained but firm. "She has nowhere else to go. She's family." "That doesn't mean she should live with us forever," Anna snapped. "She needs to figure something out." The words stung, though I pretended not to hear. Later that night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to shake off the ache in my chest. I told myself Anna was just stressed. Perhaps I was being too sensitive, but the cracks in the family facade only deepened. David worked long hours, so I rarely got to see him outside of hurried breakfasts or brief chats in the evening. Anna, meanwhile, made it clear through her actions that she saw me as an inconvenience. She would rearrange my belongings without asking, roll her eyes when I cooked meals that didn't suit her tastes, and drop subtle comments about how hard it was to manage everything with another person in the house. Still, I stayed quiet. I didn't want to make things harder for David or the children. I busied myself with chores and tried to keep out of Anna's way, though every day felt like I was walking on eggshells. Then tragedy struck. David was killed in a car accident on his way home from work. The moment the police arrived at the house, I felt the ground beneath me collapse. David was my rock, my protector, and without him, the house became an unfamiliar, hostile place. Anna's grief quickly turned into resentment, her polite indifference shifting into open hostility. "I don't know how we're going to make this work," Anna said one afternoon, only days after the funeral. She was standing in the kitchen, her arms crossed as she looked at me. Things were already tight before, but now I didn't know what to say. "I can help," I offered softly. "I'll pick up more chores, help with the kids." "I don't need a babysitter or a maid, Maria," she interrupted sharply. "What I need is space to breathe." Her words left me silent. I felt as though I'd become a stranger in my own son's home, the walls closing in around me. The children still ran to me with open arms, but even they seemed more subdued under Anna's watchful gaze. I told myself it was grief, that we were all adjusting to the loss in our own ways. But as time passed, Anna's actions grew harder to excuse. When she began dating Mark, the tension reached a breaking point. Mark was a wealthy businessman who oozed charm, but I could see through his polished veneer. He had no interest in me, barely acknowledging my existence whenever he visited. Anna, however, seemed captivated by him, and her attention to appearances became almost obsessive. One day, as she was preparing for a dinner party, she stopped me in the hallway. "I need you to stay in your room tonight," she said curtly. "We're having guests, and I don't want things to feel cramped." "Of course," I replied quietly, swallowing the lump in my throat. I stayed in my small room that evening, listening to the laughter and clinking glasses from the dining room. The exclusion was a sharp reminder of how far I'd fallen from being a valued member of the family. Things spiraled further when Anna began hinting that I should leave. "You should think about your future, Maria," she said one day over breakfast. "This isn't sustainable for any of us." I froze mid-sip of my tea. "What do you mean?" "You need to find somewhere else to live," she said bluntly, her eyes flicking down to the table. "I've done my best to make this work, but I can't support you forever." The words hit me like a blow. I wanted to argue, to remind her of everything I had done for this family, but I couldn't find the strength. The grief of losing David, the constant tension with Anna, the humiliation, it all came crashing down at once. I simply nodded and excused myself, retreating to my room where I sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall. In the days that followed, Anna grew bolder. She began packing up my belongings without asking, stacking boxes in the corner of the living room as a not so subtle reminder that my time there was running out. I kept telling myself I'd find a solution, but every option felt impossible. My savings were gone, and I had no other family to turn to. The final blow came when Anna announced she was selling the house. I overheard her discussing it with Mark late one night, her voice carrying through the thin walls. Once we're in the new place, she'll have no choice but to leave, Anna said coldly. I've already spoken to the realtor. This is the only way. Mark chuckled softly. She's been here too long anyway. It's time she figures something out. I sat frozen on the other side of the wall, my heart pounding. All the years I had poured into this family, all the love and sacrifice, and this was how I was repaid. I clenched my fists, the anger burning through the sadness. I didn't know how yet, but I resolved in that moment that I would not let them erase me from the home my son had built. The day I moved out of David's house was one of the hardest days of my life. Anna stood by the door, arms crossed, watching as I carried out my last box. She didn't offer to help, didn't say goodbye, and didn't even look me in the eye. The children were at school, so there were no hugs or tearful goodbyes from them either. Just the cold silence of a house I had once thought of as home. I found myself at a rundown shelter for the elderly. It was a place I never imagined I'd end up, with its peeling paint, dim hallways, and the faint smell of mildew that seemed to cling to the air. The room they gave me was small and bare, with just enough space for a single bed and a wobbly table. As I sat on the edge of that bed, staring at the gray walls, the reality of my situation began to sink in. This was my life now. The other residents were kind enough, but there was a heaviness in the air that seemed to weigh us all down. Most of them had stories like mine, abandoned by family, forgotten by the world. We shared quiet meals in the common area, exchanging polite words but rarely delving into deeper conversations. I could feel myself fading into the background, just another old woman with nowhere to go. One evening, as I was sorting through my few belongings, I came across the small, locked box David had given me years ago. I had almost forgotten about it. He'd handed it to me with a wink and said, "Keep this safe, Mom. You'll know what to do with it if the time ever comes." At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. But now, sitting alone in that drab room, I felt a spark of curiosity. But the shelter's handyman helped me pry it open. Inside was a stack of papers and a letter in David's handwriting. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "Mom," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means something has gone wrong. I want you to know that I've always appreciated everything you've done for me. You've sacrificed so much, and I never want you to feel like you're alone. That's why I've made sure the house and my savings are yours. Anna knows this. It's in the will. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I stared at the letter, my mind racing. He had left everything to me? How could this be? Anna had never mentioned it, and the house had always felt like hers to control. I dug through the rest of the papers and found the will. Sure enough, it was all there in black and white. The house, the savings, everything was legally mine. The anger I had buried for weeks began to bubble to the surface. Anna had known. She had lied, manipulated me, and thrown me out of my own home. The next day, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Walking into that office felt like stepping into a different world. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Miss Carter, listened intently as I explained my situation. She flipped through the will, her expression growing more serious with every page. "This is clear as day," she said, tapping the document with her pen. "The house and assets belong to you. Anna had no right to sell it, and she certainly had no right to force you out." Hearing those words felt like a weight lifting off my chest. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to hope. Miss Carter assured me she would handle everything, but she warned me it wouldn't be easy. Anna was bound to fight back, and it could get messy. I didn't care. I was ready to fight for what was mine. In the weeks that followed, I kept my actions quiet. I didn't want Anna to know what I was planning until I was ready. In the meantime, I started visiting my grandchildren at their school. It was the only way I could see them without Anna's interference. Their faces lit up when they saw me, and those moments became the highlight of my days. We'd sit on a bench under a tree, talking about school, their friends, and their dreams. They told me they missed me and that they didn't like Mark. "He's not like Dad," my grandson whispered one day. "He doesn't even play with us." Hearing that broke my heart, but it also strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for them too. The day Anna discovered my visits was inevitable. She stormed into the shelter, her face red with fury. "How dare you sneak around behind my back?" she hissed, her voice low but venomous. "You have no right to see my children without my permission." I stood my ground, meeting her glare with a calm I didn't feel. "They're my grandchildren," I said firmly. "I have every right to be in their lives, and you won't take that away from me." She scoffed, her lips curling into a sneer. "You're delusional, Maria. You're nothing to them. Nothing to any of us." Her words stung, but they didn't break me. I knew the truth now, and no amount of venom from Anna could take that away. The final turning point came when Miss Carter informed me that Anna had already listed the house for sale. It was the moment I had been waiting for. With the will in hand, we filed a legal challenge to stop the sale. Anna was served with papers the following week, and the shock on her face when she realized what I had done was almost satisfying. Almost. "You think you can win this?" she spat during a confrontation outside the courthouse. "You're pathetic, Maria. You don't belong in that house." "It's not your decision," I replied evenly. "And you'll find out soon enough that the law is on my side." As I walked away, I felt a flicker of pride I hadn't felt in years. For so long, I had let Anna's cruelty and manipulation overshadow my worth. But now I was taking back what was mine. It wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about standing up for myself and reclaiming the dignity I had almost lost. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like I had a chance. And that was enough to keep me going. When the court ruled in my favor, I sat there in stunned silence, clutching the edges of my chair. The judge's voice seemed to echo in the room, declaring that the house belonged to me and that Anna had no legal grounds to sell it. The rest of the proceedings blurred together, but one thing stood out clearly. I had won. After everything I had endured, justice had finally been served. Anna's reaction was predictably explosive. Outside the courtroom, she stormed toward me, her face a mask of fury. "You think this changes anything?" she spat. "You've ruined everything. You're just a bitter old woman who doesn't know when to let go." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say to her. I turned and walked away, feeling a sense of closure that I hadn't thought possible. She could shout and fume all she wanted, but the house was mine again, and she no longer had the power to take anything from me. Returning to the house was bittersweet. As I stepped inside, the memories of happier times came flooding back. David's laughter echoing through the halls, the children running up to me with their drawings, the quiet evenings spent together as a family. But those memories were tinged with the pain of how much had changed. The house felt emptier now, stripped of the warmth it once held. Still, it was mine, and I was determined to restore it, not just physically, but emotionally. The first thing I did was pack up Anna's things. I didn't throw them out, though I was tempted. Instead, I neatly boxed them up and had them delivered to her new apartment. It wasn't out of kindness. It was out of a desire to truly start fresh. I wanted every trace of her cruelty out of my home. Reclaiming the house was just the beginning. It took weeks to clean up the mess Anna had left behind. The rooms were in disarray, and it was clear she hadn't cared about maintaining the place. I scrubbed, painted, and repaired, pouring all my energy into making the house feel like home again. It was exhausting, but it was also cathartic. With every stroke of the paintbrush, I felt like I was reclaiming not just the space, but a piece of myself. The grandchildren were the first to visit. When they arrived, they ran through the door with wide smiles, throwing their arms around me. "We missed you so much, Grandma," my granddaughter said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. Seeing their joy reminded me of why I had fought so hard. This house wasn't just for me, it was for them, too. I wanted them to have a place where they felt loved and safe, a place where they could create happy memories without the shadow of Anna's bitterness looming over them. I made a point of setting boundaries with Anna. When she called, demanding to know when she could visit the children at the house, I calmly told her that any arrangements would be made on my terms. "You're welcome to see them, Anna," I said, "but this is my home now. You'll respect that, or you won't be welcome here." She didn't respond, but I could hear the frustration in her silence. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. As the weeks turned into months, the house began to transform. I started hosting gatherings for other seniors from the shelter, many of whom had become like family to me during my time there. We shared meals, told stories, and laughed together, filling the once empty house with warmth and life. It wasn't the same as having David there, but it was a start. One afternoon, as I was preparing tea for my guests, Anna showed up unannounced. She stood on the doorstep, looking more worn and frazzled than I had ever seen her. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than I expected. I hesitated, but eventually nodded, stepping aside to let her in. She sat at the kitchen table, fiddling with the edge of her coat. I I didn't think you'd actually win," she admitted, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I thought you'd give up." "Well, you underestimated me," I said simply, pouring her a cup of tea. There was no malice in my words, just a quiet truth. "I'm sorry," she said after a long pause. Her voice was barely above a whisper, and I wasn't sure if the words were genuine or just a product of her desperation. "I didn't mean for things to get so bad.
I
I
watched her
was just
carefully,
angry, searching for
lost.
signs of sincerity." "You hurt me, Anna," I said. "You took advantage of my grief, my love for this family. You made me feel like I was nothing." She winced, her hands tightening around the teacup. "I know, and I can't take it back, but I want to make things right." I didn't reply immediately. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to let the past go and start fresh. But another part of me, the part that had endured her cruelty, wasn't ready to trust her again. "Making things right starts with your actions, not your words," I said finally. "If you truly mean what you say, show me." She nodded, though I could see the tension in her shoulders. We left it at that, and she didn't stay long. After she left, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, anger, and a flicker of hope. Time would tell if her apology meant anything. In the end, I didn't fight for the house just to hold on to bricks and mortar. I fought for my dignity, my family, and my sense of self. I fought because I deserved better than what Anna had tried to give me. And as I stood in the backyard one evening, watching my grandchildren chase fireflies under the fading light of the day, I knew I had made the right choice. This house wasn't just a structure, it was a testament to resilience, love, and the power of standing up for oneself. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them, knowing I was stronger than I had ever believed. Life gradually settled into a new rhythm after reclaiming the house. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Each day brought its own small victories: organizing the garden, repainting the living room, hanging up old photographs that had been tucked away for far too long. Every task was a reminder that I had fought for the space and that I was capable of rebuilding a life I could be proud of. The grandchildren visited often, and their laughter filled the empty spaces left by the past. They had grown so much in such a short time. My grandson, always curious and full of questions, would sit with me as I prepared meals, peppering me with stories about his friends and favorite books. My granddaughter loved baking with me, her tiny hands covered in flour as we shaped cookies together. Those moments brought light back into my days, even if they were bittersweet reminders of the family I once had with David. Anna, for her part, stayed mostly distant. She would drop off the kids without coming inside, lingering awkwardly on the porch. I kept our interactions civil but distant, careful not to reopen old wounds. She seemed to sense that the power she once held over me was gone, and though I could see flickers of regret in her eyes, I wasn't ready to let her back into my heart. Trust was something she would have to earn, and I wasn't in a hurry to give it freely. One day, while sorting through a box of David's belongings, I found an old journal he had kept in his 20s. The sight of his handwriting brought tears to my eyes, but I smiled as I flipped through the pages. He had written about his dreams, his plans for the future, and his gratitude for the family that had supported him. One entry stood out to me. No matter what happens, I want mom to know she's the glue that holds us together. She's stronger than she realizes, and I hope I can repay her someday. Those words stayed with me as I continued piecing my life back together. They were a reminder that even in my lowest moments, I had been seen and appreciated by the person who mattered most. As the months passed, I began opening the house to others in need. It started with small gatherings for the friends I had made at the shelter. We would sit in the living room, sipping tea, and sharing stories about the struggles we had faced. There was a quiet strength in those meetings, a sense of solidarity that came from knowing we weren't alone. Soon the gatherings grew into something more. I started hosting weekly lunches, inviting not just the seniors but also local families and neighbors who were struggling. The house became a hub of warmth and community, just as I had always hoped it would be. Then one day, Anna showed up on the doorstep again. This time, she wasn't dropping off the children. She stood there, her face pale and drawn, clutching a folder in her hands. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I hesitated, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to turn her away, but there was something in her expression that made me pause. Reluctantly, I stepped aside and let her in. She followed me into the kitchen, setting the folder on the table before sitting down across from me. "What's this about?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting nervously. "It's about Mark," she began. He left me." I blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean?" Anna sighed, her shoulders slumping. "He said he didn't sign up for all of this. The stress, the drama, the fallout from the court case. He packed his things and left a few weeks ago." I didn't know how to respond. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy for her. I knew all too well what it felt like to be abandoned by someone you trusted. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said softly, though I wasn't sure if I entirely meant it. "I don't deserve your sympathy," she said, her voice cracking. "I know what I did to you was unforgivable. I was selfish, cruel," and she stopped, taking a shaky breath. "I've lost everything because of it." There was a long silence between us, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. Finally, she pushed the folder toward me. "These are financial statements," she said. "After the court case and Mark's departure, I'm barely scraping by. I came here to ask if there's any way you could help me. Not for me," she added quickly, "but for the kids. They need stability, and I can't give it to them right now." Her words cut deep, and I could feel the conflict rising within me. She had hurt me in ways I could never forget, but the thought of my grandchildren suffering was unbearable. I opened the folder, glancing at the papers inside. It was clear she was telling the truth. Her finances were in shambles. For a moment, I was tempted to turn her away, to remind her of how she had left me with nothing. But as I looked at her, sitting there with tears in her eyes, I realized something. This wasn't about Anna. It wasn't even about the past. It was about doing what was right for the people I loved. And if helping her meant giving my grandchildren a better chance at happiness, then so be it. "I'll help," I said finally, my voice firm. "But there will be conditions. This is my home now, and you'll respect that. If you want my support, you'll have to prove that you've changed." She nodded quickly, her relief palpable. "I will," she said. "I swear I will." It wasn't an easy decision, and I knew it wouldn't be an easy road ahead. But as I watched Anna leave that day, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the power to shape my own future and the future of the family I still cared for, despite everything. Life would go on, and I would continue to rebuild one step at a time. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, I knew I had the strength to face them. This house, this family, and this life were worth fighting for. And fight I would for as long as it took. The first few weeks after Anna's visit were a whirlwind of mixed emotions. I had agreed to help her, but the lingering sting of her betrayal made it difficult to trust her sincerity. Still, I reminded myself that this wasn't just about her, it was about the children. They deserved a stable, happy life, and if helping Anna could provide that for them, I had to put my feelings aside. I set clear boundaries. Anna wasn't moving back into the house, not yet, but I offered her financial support to cover her rent and basic needs. In return, I expected her to focus on rebuilding her life and being a good mother to the children. I also made it clear that our arrangement wasn't an open invitation to revert to old habits.
To my surprise,
Respect was Anna seemed to take my
non-negotiable.
conditions seriously. She started showing up at the house more frequently, not just to drop off the children, but to spend time with them. At first, I kept my distance, observing from the sidelines. She was cautious around me, her words measured, her actions deliberate. It was clear she was trying, though I wasn't sure if it was out of genuine remorse or sheer desperation. One afternoon, as Anna and I sat on the porch watching the children play, she broke the silence. "I've been seeing a therapist," she said, her voice quiet. "I'm trying to work through everything." I glanced at her, surprised. "That's a good step," I said cautiously. "What made you decide to go?" She hesitated, picking at the edge of her sleeve. After Mark left, I realized I'd spent so much time blaming everyone else for my problems. I never stopped to look at myself, at the choices I made. She paused, her gaze fixed on the children. I didn't want to be the kind of person my kids would grow up resenting. Her words caught me off guard. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of the Anna I had hoped she could be, someone willing to take responsibility for her actions. It didn't erase the past, but it was a start. As the days turned into weeks, Anna's efforts became more evident. She volunteered to help with chores around the house, cooked meals for the children, and even joined me in the garden one morning. "I used to love gardening as a kid," she admitted, kneeling beside me to pull weeds. "My grandmother had this tiny patch of flowers in her yard, and I'd spend hours with her planting and watering." Her voice softened as she spoke, and for a moment, I saw the young girl she must have been before life hardened her edges. It was a small moment, but it felt significant. Still, trust isn't rebuilt overnight. There were moments when old doubts crept in, when her kindness felt like a performance rather than a genuine change. But each time, I reminded myself that change takes time and that forgiveness is a process, not an instant decision. One evening, as we were clearing the dinner table, Anna handed me a small envelope. "I've been wanting to give you this," she said, her tone hesitant. I opened it and found a letter inside, handwritten in her neat script. As I read, my eyes filled with tears. She had poured her heart into the letter, acknowledging her mistakes and expressing regret for how she had treated me. "I can't change the past," she wrote, "but I want to build a better future for me, for the kids, and for you. You deserved better, and I'm sorry I didn't see that sooner." I folded the letter carefully, my emotions a jumble of pain and hope. "Thank you," I said, my voice trembling. "This means more than you know." In the following weeks, Anna continued to make amends. She started participating in the community lunches I hosted, helping to serve meals and getting to know the people who had become like family to me. At first, the other seniors were wary of her. Most of them knew the story of what had happened between us, but Anna's genuine efforts began to win them over. One day, after a particularly lively lunch, one of my friends pulled me aside. "She's trying," she said, nodding toward Anna, who was helping clean up. "You can see it in the way she talks to people, the way she looks at you. It's not easy for someone to admit they were wrong." I nodded, feeling a mix of pride and apprehension. I wanted to believe Anna had changed, but part of me was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. It was hard to let go of the past when the wounds were still healing. The turning point came one rainy evening when Anna arrived at the house unexpectedly. She was soaked from the storm, her hair plastered to her face, but she didn't seem to care. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice urgent. I led her into the kitchen, handing her a towel and a warm drink. She sat at the table, her hands trembling slightly. I've been thinking a lot about everything about David, about the way I treated you, and I realized something, she began. I was jealous, not just of the way he loved you, but of the person you are. You have this strength, this goodness, that I didn't think I could ever measure up to. Her confession left me speechless. She looked at me, her eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Regret? Maybe. Or something deeper. I pushed you away because I was afraid, she continued. Afraid that I'd never be enough, that I'd always be the outsider in this family. I reached across the table, placing my hand over hers. Anna, I said gently, being a part of this family isn't about measuring up. It's about love, forgiveness, and trying to do better. And I can see that you're trying. Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, I felt a crack in the wall I had built around my heart. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of something close. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about David's words in his journal. She's stronger than she realizes. For so long, I had focused on surviving, on fighting for what was mine, that I hadn't stopped to see the strength it had taken to keep going. And now, as I began to let go of the past, I realized that strength could be used for something else, rebuilding not just the house, but the family I had nearly lost. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt like it was heading in the right direction. It was a sunny morning when I found Anna sitting on the porch steps, staring at the garden I had worked so hard to restore. Her shoulders were hunched, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. It was unusual to see her so still. She always seemed to be moving, talking, or busying herself with some task. I hesitated at the doorway, wondering if I should leave her alone, but something told me to join her. I stepped outside and sat beside her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. Finally, Anna broke the silence. Do you ever think about what it would have been like if David were still here? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her question caught me off guard, but I nodded. Every day, I said honestly, there isn't a moment that goes by where I don't wonder how different things would be. She sighed, her gaze fixed on a patch of wildflowers near the fence. I've been thinking about him a lot lately, about how much I took him for granted. He was so patient with me, even when I didn't deserve it. I didn't reply right away. David's patience had been one of his greatest strengths, but it had also been one of the reasons Anna had felt comfortable treating me the way she had. Still, I could hear the sincerity in her voice, and I didn't want to dismiss her feelings. He loved you, I said gently, and he believed in you, even when you couldn't see it yourself. Anna's eyes filled with tears, and she wiped at them quickly, as if embarrassed to show vulnerability. I wish I could go back and tell him how much I appreciated him, she said. But it's too late. It's not too late to honor his memory, I replied. You can still make choices that reflect the kind of person he believed you could be. She looked at me, her expression a mix of hope and uncertainty. Do you think I can really change? After everything I've done? I met her gaze, my own emotions conflicted. Change isn't easy, I said. It takes time and effort, and it won't erase the past. But if you're willing to keep trying, I believe it's possible. Anna nodded slowly, as if she were absorbing my words. I want to try, she said. For the kids, for myself, and for you. Her admission surprised me, and for a moment, I wasn't sure what to say. But as I watched her, I realized that this was the first time she had truly opened up to me. It wasn't an apology, but it was a step toward something better. In the weeks that followed, Anna's actions began to match her words. She continued attending therapy and started volunteering at a local community center, helping families who were going through tough times. She even invited me to visit the center one day, and I saw firsthand how much she had changed. The Anna I saw there was compassionate and patient, qualities I hadn't after she had dropped off the kids for the weekend. She lingered in the kitchen while I prepared dinner. Do you need help? She asked, her tone hesitant. Ich glänzte her, surprised. Sure, I said, handing her a cutting board and a knife. You can chop the vegetables. As we worked side by side, the silence between us felt less strained than it used to. We talked about the kids, the garden, and even the recipes David used to love. It was a small moment, but it felt significant, like the first threads of a bridge being built between us. Later that night, as we sat at the table eating, my granddaughter asked a question that made both Anna and me pause. "Grandma," she said, her voice innocent and curious, "are you and mommy friends now?" Anna and I exchanged a glance, unsure of how to answer. Finally, I said, "We're working on it." Anna nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Yes," she added, "we're working on it." It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was an honest one. As the months passed, Anna and I found a new rhythm. She still had her moments of doubt, and I still struggled to fully let go of the hurt she had caused, but we were moving forward. The children thrived in a stable environment, and their laughter filled the house in a way that made all the effort feel worth it. One afternoon, as Anna and I sat in the garden watching the kids play, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. She said, "I used to think that strength was about never showing weakness. But watching you, I've realized that real strength is about facing your mistakes and trying to make things right." Her words struck a chord in me. For so long, I had seen myself as a victim of her actions. But in that moment, I realized that I'd been strong in ways I hadn't fully acknowledged. I had stood up for myself, fought for my family, and found a way to move forward despite the pain. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." She smiled, and for the first time, it felt genuine, free of pretense or expectation. In that moment, I saw a glimpse of the relationship we might one day have, a relationship built on mutual respect and understanding. The journey wasn't over, but it felt like we were finally on the right path. As I watched the children chase each other across the yard, their laughter echoing in the warm evening air, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. This house, this family, and this life were worth every struggle. And for the first time, I truly believed that we could find our way forward together. The day Anna invited me to her apartment was a quiet milestone. She had been working hard to rebuild her life, and this was her way of showing me that progress. I accepted the invitation, curious to see what she had managed to create for herself and the children after so much upheaval. When I arrived, I was surprised by how modest yet warm the space felt. It was nothing like the grand house she had tried to claim for herself. Instead, it was cozy and personal, with drawings from the kids pinned to the walls and mismatched furniture that told stories of being chosen for comfort rather than style. Anna greeted me with a nervous smile, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel as she led me inside. "It's not much," she said, glancing around as if seeing the flaws through my eyes. "But it's ours." I could tell she was bracing herself for judgment, but I saw none of the bitterness or pretense that used to shadow her words. "It's lovely," I said sincerely. "It feels like a home." Relief softened her features, and she gestured for me to sit down. The kids ran to me, wrapping their arms around me in excited hugs, and for a moment, it felt like we were all part of something whole again. Anna served tea and homemade cookies, something I never thought I'd see her do. It was clear she had been making an effort, not just with her life, but with her connection to me. As we sat together, the conversation drifted toward the children's school, their hobbies, and even Anna's work at the community center. She spoke with a kind of pride I hadn't heard before, a sense of fulfillment that seemed to come from within rather than from trying to impress others. "I've been thinking a lot about how I can give back," she said, her tone thoughtful. "Working at the center has shown me how much good can come from simply being there for people when they need it. I've spent so much time taking, and now I want to focus on giving." Her words struck a chord in me, and I found myself nodding. "It's amazing how much you learn about yourself when you stop focusing on what you don't have and start appreciating what you do," I said. She glanced at me, her expression sincere. "You've always been good at that," she said. "Even when I couldn't see it, you always knew what was truly important." Her comment surprised me, and I felt a warmth I hadn't expected. For years, I had waited for validation from Anna, but now that it was here, it felt less like a victory and more like a step toward understanding. We still had a long way to go, but in that moment, I felt the weight of past wounds begin to lift. The visit ended on a high note, with promises to do it again soon. As I left, I couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious hope. Anna was changing, and for the first time, I believed that those changes were real. It wasn't about making amends for the past, it was about building something better for the future. Back at the house, I continued my routines, but my thoughts often drifted to that afternoon. The house had become a symbol of resilience, a place where I had fought to reclaim my life and my dignity. But now, it was also becoming a place of reconciliation, a foundation for a new kind of family. One evening, Anna arrived unannounced, her face flushed with excitement. I have an idea, she said, practically bouncing on her heels. I want to organize a fundraiser at the community center. Something for families who've been through what we have: displacement, loss, starting over. I think it could really help people. I was taken aback by her enthusiasm, but her words sparked something in me. That sounds wonderful, I said. How can I help? Her smile widened, and we spent the evening brainstorming ideas. It felt good to work together, to channel our energy into something positive. The fundraiser became a shared project, and for the first time, I saw Anna's determination as a force for good rather than something to fear. When the day of the fundraiser arrived, the community center was filled with families, laughter, and a palpable sense of hope. Anna moved through the crowd with ease, greeting people, sharing stories, and radiating a kindness I hadn't seen in her before. I watched from the sidelines, my heart swelling with pride as I saw how far she had come. As the evening wound down, Anna approached me, her expression thoughtful. "This wouldn't have happened without you," she said. "You believed in me even when I didn't deserve it." I shook my head. "You made the choice to change, Anna. That was all you." She smiled, but there was a flicker of something deeper in her eyes: gratitude, perhaps, or a quiet recognition of everything we had been through. "I hope I can keep making you proud," she said softly. "You already have," I replied. The drive home that night was quiet, the stars shining brightly against the dark sky. As I pulled into the driveway and stepped into the house, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The house was no longer just a battleground or a sanctuary. It was a place of growth, of healing, of second chances. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, moments when the past threatened to overshadow the progress we had made. But as I sat in the living room, surrounded by the warmth of memories old and new, I felt ready to face whatever came next. Anna's journey wasn't just her own, it was part of ours, a story of resilience and reconciliation that we were writing together, one step at a time. The day Anna and I faced each other in the courtroom felt like a lifetime ago. The bitterness, the accusations, the betrayal, it had all been so raw and overwhelming. Now, as I stood in the house I had fought so hard to reclaim, it felt like the scars from that battle were finally starting to fade. Life had shifted in ways I couldn't have imagined, and while the wounds hadn't entirely healed, there was a peace settling over me that I hadn't thought possible. The house itself felt different these days. Where it had once been a battleground, it now pulsed with life. The laughter of my grandchildren filled the halls, their voices echoing in a way that made the walls feel alive again. Anna's visits, once tense and filled with underlying resentment, had become moments of connection. She wasn't just dropping off the kids anymore. She was staying for dinner, helping with the dishes, and even joining me in the garden. It was as though she had finally realized what it meant to be part of a family, not just to take, we sat together on the back porch, watching the children chase fireflies. Anna turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen before: vulnerability mixed with gratitude. "I never thought I'd say this," she began, her voice quiet, "but this house feels like home again. And that's because of you." Her words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "It's not just me," I said finally. "It's all of us. We've all had to work to make it that way." She nodded, her gaze drifting to the children. "I'm trying, she said, "to be better. For them. For you." "I know," I replied, "and I see it." Those three simple words seemed to mean more to her than anything else I could have said. She smiled, a small, genuine smile that reminded me of the woman David had fallen in love with all those years ago. It wasn't the same smile. It was wiser, softer, touched by the hardships she had endured and the lessons she had learned. As the days passed, Anna continued to show her growth in ways big and small. She started planning family outings, something she had never done before. One weekend, she suggested we take the kids to the local park for a picnic. It was a simple idea, but it turned into a day filled with laughter and joy. The kids played on the swings. Anna and I shared stories from our childhoods, and for a few hours, it felt like the weight of the past had been lifted. That evening, as we packed up the picnic and headed back to the house, my granddaughter took my hand and said, "I'm so glad we're all together again, Grandma." Her words stayed with me as I tucked her and her brother into bed later that night. Together, that was what we had become, not a perfect family, but one that was learning to move forward, to heal. Of course, the journey wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when the old wounds resurfaced, when a stray comment or a forgotten chore sparked tension. But instead of letting those moments spiral into something bigger, Anna and I began to address them head on. We talked, something we had rarely done before, and each conversation brought us a little closer to understanding each other. One afternoon, as we sat together folding laundry, Anna brought up David. "I've been thinking a lot about him lately," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "About what he'd think of everything that's happened." I paused, the shirt in my hands momentarily forgotten. "What do you think he'd say?" I asked. She sighed, a small, bittersweet smile playing on her lips. "I think he'd be proud of you," she said. "And I think he'd tell me to stop being such a fool." I chuckled softly. "He probably would," I said. "But he'd also be proud of you, Anna. You've come a long way." Her smile widened slightly, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of self-acceptance in her eyes. It wasn't complete, but it was a start. The turning point came during one of our community lunches. Anna had taken on a more active role in organizing them, and this particular event was her idea, a celebration of resilience, bringing together families who had overcome challenges similar to ours. As I watched her move through the crowd, greeting people, sharing her story, and offering words of encouragement, I felt a swell of pride. Later that afternoon, as we cleaned up together, she turned to me with an almost shy expression. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," she said. "You've done more than you realize," I replied. "You've found your strength, Anna. That's all you." She hesitated, then said, "I hope I've found a way to repay you for everything." I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the woman she had become. "You don't owe me anything," I said gently. "But if you want to repay me, just keep being the mother your kids deserve. Keep building this life for them." She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I will," she said, her voice steady. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet house, I thought about everything that had brought us to this moment. The pain, the betrayal, the fights. It had all led to this, a place of tentative peace and understanding. We weren't the same people we had been when this journey began, and that was a good thing. We had grown, together and apart. And in doing so, we had found a way to move forward. The house, once a symbol of everything that had gone wrong, now felt like a beacon of hope. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, a place where we could continue to heal, to grow, to love. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at home. It was a warm Sunday afternoon, and the house was alive with activity. The children were playing in the backyard, their laughter floating through the open windows. I stood in the kitchen, arranging sandwiches on a tray while Anna prepared drinks. The sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting a golden glow over the room. It felt like a scene from a life I had almost forgotten, a life filled with simple joys and togetherness. As I worked, I glanced at Anna. She was humming softly to herself, a content smile playing on her lips. It was a small but significant change. The tension that had once defined her presence was gone, replaced by a calm that came from within. She caught me watching her and raised an eyebrow. "What?" she asked, her tone playful. "Nothing," I replied with a smile. "You just seem happy." She paused, considering my words. I think I am, she said softly. For the first time in a long time, I feel like things are finally falling into place. Her honesty warmed my heart. I reached over and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. You've worked hard for this, Anna. And drinks outside, you deserve it. Joining the kids under the shade of the old oak tree. They immediately swarmed the tray, grabbing sandwiches and laughing as they jostled for the best spots on the picnic blanket. Anna and I sat side by side, watching them with matching smiles. It felt good to share this moment, to be part of something whole and real. As the afternoon wore on, the conversation turned to memories of David. The kids asked questions about their father, eager to learn more about the man they were too young to remember fully. Anna and I took turns sharing stories, his love of music, his knack for fixing anything that was broken, and his unwavering belief in the people he loved. He would have loved this, Anna said, her voice tinged with both sadness and warmth. Seeing us all together like this. I nodded, feeling the familiar ache of his absence. He would have been proud, I said, of all of us. The kids eventually ran off to play, leaving Anna and me sitting in companionable silence. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dappled patterns on the ground. It was one of those rare moments where everything felt right, as though the world had paused to let us breathe. I've been thinking, Anna said suddenly, breaking the silence, about what's next. I turned to her, curious. What do you mean? I mean for us, she said, gesturing between us. For this family, I want to make sure we keep building on what we've started. I don't want to fall back into old habits. Her words resonated deeply with me. Neither do I said. But the fact that you're even thinking about it shows how far you've come, Anna. It's not about being perfect. It's about trying every day. She nodded, a determined look on her face. I want this to be different, she said. For the kids, for you, and for me. Her resolve gave me hope. We had come so far, and while the journey hadn't been easy, it had been worth it. Together, we had turned a house once filled with pain and division into a home where healing and love could thrive. That evening, after Anna and the kids had gone home, I sat alone in the quiet of the living room. The house felt peaceful, its walls no longer burdened by the weight of old hurts. I looked around at the photographs lining the mantel, pictures of David, the kids, and even a recent one of Anna and me smiling together at the community fundraiser. Each image told a story, a testament to the resilience and strength that had brought us to this point. I thought about all the times I had doubted this outcome, the nights I had cried myself to sleep, wondering if I would ever feel whole again. But now, sitting in the glow of the lamp, I realized that those struggles had shaped me, had shaped all of us. We were stronger because of them, not in spite of them. The following weekend, we hosted another gathering, this time inviting not just the community, but also friends from Anna's life. It was a celebration of how far we had come and a chance to share our story with others who might be struggling. As I moved through the crowd, greeting guests and sharing laughs, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was the life I had fought for, not just for me, but for my family. At one point, I caught sight of Anna standing with the children, her face lit up with joy as they showed her their latest drawings. She looked up and met my gaze, giving me a small, grateful smile. I nodded back, a silent acknowledgement of everything we had overcome. As the evening wound down, I found myself sitting on the back porch, watching the stars. The house was quiet again, but it no longer felt empty. It was filled with the echoes of laughter, the warmth of connection, and the promise of a brighter future. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. This house had seen so much love and loss, betrayal and redemption. It had been a symbol of pain and a battleground for control. But now it was something more. It was a home, a place where healing and hope had taken root. And as I sat there under the vast expanse of the night sky, I knew that we would continue to grow, to rebuild, and to thrive. Life wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But it was ours, and that was enough.